Welcome to ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. I'm your host, Tigrila Gardenia, nature-inspired mentor and leadership coach. In this podcast, I share ancient and modern knowledge from biology to spirituality about the wondrous ways in which plants can help you lead a naturally conscious life. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. In general, when I set up and try to create an episode for you, I usually start off with either a question somebody asked me, a concept that keeps coming up in the naturally conscious community, just something, or something that maybe is a whisper from the plants. And that's kind of what this episode really is. It's a whisper from the plants. It's a whisper from the plants that's not going to be so much a look. My episodes, as you already know, if you've been here for a while, they're not exactly completely linear because after working with plants for so long, the connections go out in multiple directions. And as I speak, the connections become clearer. Let's say it in that way. And so what happens is that I start to go off on a connection and then have to bring it back and roll it back into the discussion. So this episode, which is episode 56, is going to be this type of conversation. So I hope you are ready for a exploration into a topic that I'm not hearing many people talking about. I mean, I'm hearing people talking about it in one realm, but not necessarily in the way that I'm talking about it. So my goal with this episode is to open a discussion with you. Okay, I'm letting you into the inner workings of my mind, into the way that I kind of see aspects of the world, and when things kind of don't gel with the way that other people have interpreted them, where do I pull from the science to try to understand? Where do I sit with the plants and try to get to a better understanding and definition? And then I hope I will bring it into why I think this is so important in your life, in my life, in everybody's life. So today's episode, which is episode 56, I think I'm going to title, Is Fear Holding Us Back from Evolving? Now, that in and of itself really seems normal, right? Tons of people talk about this. But look, let's take this from a biological perspective for a second, and then we're going to extrapolate. Sorry, I hit my microphone. We're going to take it from a biological perspective, and then we're going to extrapolate out. We're going to extrapolate. Yeah, that's a good word for it. We're going to extrapolate out. So here's the thing. Plants and animals have tons of different species, right? We have, if you look around your own home, most likely you have plants or animal friends, plant friends who are of different species altogether. Now, for those of you that are curious as to exactly what, from a biological perspective, a species is, I'm going to read to you one of several definitions. A biological species is a group of organisms that can reproduce with one another in nature and produce fertile offsprings. If you've, even when we're talking about many different kinds of species, you hear the Latin nomenclature that we use, that is usually the genus and then the species. The genus and the species are the two most common. It really actually goes much farther. It actually, believe it or not, starts with life, then domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So there's a lot of definitions in there. And you know that we've had this whole conversation that we've renamed the kingdom to the kin home. But maybe I'll do another episode about that. That would be fun for you to understand kind of the entire discussion. Actually, I'm going to write myself a note, kin home, because that was an entire discussion we had inside the naturally conscious community that was quite fascinating, of how we ended up with kin home instead of kingdom for that particular level. So when you're thinking about species, which is the lowest level on the rung, of this whole list, the most recent rigorous estimate for the total number of species in eukaryotes is between 8 and 8.7 million. Okay, these are organisms whose cells have a membrane-bound nucleus. I know that sounds very complicated for those of you that are not biologists, but basically all animals, fungi, and plants, and many unicellular organisms, sorry. So all animals, all plants, all fungi, many unicellular organisms, which means that if you just divide by each one of those kinhomes, animal kinhome, of which we are a part, plant kinhome, fungi kinhome, and probably all the other kinhomes that exist, we still get to millions and millions of species in each one. Okay? So before I go into my thinking, let me just kind of break down a little bit more the biology to make it really easy to understand, because there's a lot of confusion around species. And I don't think we're going to hit the confusion in this discussion. Most of the confusion goes when you're looking at many of these kinhomes, like the plant kinhome that has so many different kinds of species, and the fine line between one species and another, especially when you use that very broad definition that I had about being able to breed, is it's not always clear. And the way that plants interact with one another, as well as animals and others, is that there's a constant interbreeding that's happening, which means new species are being born every single day. So basically, Darwin's most basic theory of evolution, again, I'm going basic on purpose. If you want to have more details, if you want to get into this more, then, as you know, the naturally conscious community is the place for you to go, because this is where we have these types of conversations. But basically, Darwin outlined this process where a species could change over time, believed that evolution was really a slow and gradual process that played out over eons, right? So a species are always constantly changing, and new species are being formed in this slow pace of evolution. It's really hard for us as human beings to see this, because if you were to look at the beginning of time to where we are today, we as Homo sapiens, as the species that we are like a blip in time. In biomimicry, there's this wonderful kind of graph that always gets shown, which I love, that shows, like, if you look at 3.8 billion years of evolution, which is our planetary evolution, and then you look at that and you go to where, humans, as the modern day humans began, we began in the last kind of 2 minutes of this 24-hour story. So if you look at 3.8 billion years and squeeze it into 24 hours, and you map out how all these different species came to be, or at least even the kinhome, and you go from that level and you come all the way down, Homo sapiens are like a teeny tiny little blip at the very end. So, we haven't really been here. So therefore, it's really difficult for us to look at exactly what the evolution of species is. And the thing is that humans, modern day humans, you probably who is watching this, not the plants that are with you, your plant friends, hi, or the animal friends around you, hi to you too, or the divine friends that are there, hello to everybody. Basically, humans, us, we Homo sapiens, all belong to one species, of which, as I just said, the scientific name is Homo sapiens. We differ from other species such as gorillas and dogs and dandelions and worms of all sorts. Like, we are a unique species. Homo sapiens is currently the only member of the genus Homo that is alive. Okay, only one species of human. The thing is, this wasn't always the case. So if you go down and you start looking and you do any history, any anthropological history or paleontology, and you look at the human family tree, the genus, so remember, species is the last piece of this puzzle, and it's the most individuated, let's say, the genus, which is like the grouping, Homo, goes back about 300 million years, where Homo sapiens, we, are about 200,000 years old from, again, biology. I am not talking about divine and spiritual realms. There we will have another, come to Dominher, and we can sit down and look at the spiritual physics, and we can look at whatever it is that is your philosophical traditions and religious traditions, and we can have lots of discussions, because I love these discussions. For right now, we're going to kind of mix a little bit the philosophical premises that I'm going to bring out with our biological research, because this is ReConnect with Plant Wisdom, so we're taking in what the plants are giving us. So the genus Homo is maybe probably about 3 million years ago. Let's extend it to the entire hominin family, and maybe we're going to get to 6 million. Okay, we're getting somewhere in that realm based on the current information we have. Humans could be a little bit older, a little bit younger, all possible in the 3.8 billion years of life on this planet. And yet, and yet, in all that Homo genus, 3 million years, there were dozens at some point, dozens of different species within, which is already small when you compare to other genuses, but still relatively large given how young we are. Okay, fine. But what happened to them all? Why is it that we only have Homo sapiens left? Why is that? Now, I could tell you that there is a philosophical argument that I have heard in Dominer, and we've had this discussion in a few other circles around the idea that the sapiens species is relatively aggressive. Not me, of course, me, no, but relatively aggressive, and therefore, likes this whole competition model. Now, if you remember one of my recent episodes, we were talking about relationships, and I went through all kinds of different relationships. So we as humans have this, we kind of focus, us human, as in Homo sapiens, focus a lot on this competition factor, which is not really the dominant paradigm in a lot of other parts of the natural world. But let's leave that out for a second. Why is it that Homo sapiens, the entire genus of Homo, only has one species, which is Homo sapiens? Now, over the years, I have asked this question to plants because obviously working with many different plants, and especially as I am always looking to identify plants, both as the individual being that specific plant is, as well as being able to be respectful of the species or genus when it applies. And I have to say that it doesn't always apply. Like, there are some plants that don't necessarily, at least in my experience working with them directly, don't necessarily, I don't want to say they identify themselves as as the same species, but at the same time can manifest many different kinds of characteristics, and through different mutations can have various colors and different other aspects of the thing. But again, humans, not so much. And so I got to thinking about this, especially as I was thinking about what is it that it's going to take for us as humans to really evolve our divineness. So moving out from today, the nomenclature that I talked about is a scientific nomenclature, which is of course very much grounded into the physical. But given the fact that I study, many different realms and live in a spiritual community, the spiritual realm is the one missing from that list. And again, understandably so, from a scientific perspective, it's like, how do you quantify this? But if I think about the whole concept of Homo divinus, which was my original concept thought process, was, well, how does Homo sapien evolve to something like Homo divinus, or what someone like Harari talks about Homo deus? And then I started to think, well, wait a minute, is that really the evolution that we want? And then why am I thinking about this one species of human when, again, in conjunction with the plant kinhome, I see all these other species? And so I started to realize that I was like, is it possible that this thing that I was thinking about as Homo divinus is really more Homo sapien divinus? In other words, the divine state that a human being, the existing human being, evolves into. It's almost like I feel like there's this missing link where, there's this thing between Homo and then, so the genus Homo, the species, in our case, sapien, and then the divinus is the sort of next level, which is the divine line, which could have many different kinds of aspects. So this is where my mind has been playing around, and I started to realize that there's this gap, because in the human realm, we only have this one species inside of it. And it just feels so bizarre when we think of ourselves, and exclusionary also. And how can one species really express everything that is inside of that genus? So if you look at everything that is actually physically, let's just talk for a second, physically within us, in our possibilities, then isn't it possible that one species is part only allowing one species to emerge? And I'm going to get to why I said those specific words of only allowing. Could that be the thing that is holding us back from the expression of all these different aspects? It's almost like we stopped at Homo sapiens. And not only did we stop, if you think about humans and the way that we talk, the way that we act, the way that we behave, and the way we label things, which I'm going to get to in a second, it's almost like we've stunted ourselves, that there should be more Homo species underneath this genus. And it is when we have this full expression of all of our different capabilities in all of these different species that we can arrive to a more divine state and a more exalted state, because now we have full expression and we can then bring that full expression into the world of form. And from the world of form, then we can reconnect back in to all these other subtle states. The first time I connected with a plant and actually received a response, I got chills. It is such an invigorating sensation when you break through like that and realize just how connected we are and that we are nature. As a nature inspired mentor myself, I was super excited to stumble upon the Shift Network and its mission to empower a global network of evolutionary change agents. Talk about my kind of movement. There are so many inspiring thought leaders, healers, empaths, and other visionaries all under one roof, each with an individual and collective mission to help you reawaken and co create a just and prosperous world. Now, check out the show notes, click on the link, and learn more about the Shift Network. Consider enrolling even in a course or two. They are the perfect complement to your evolving naturally conscious life. I hope you enjoy what you find in the Shift Network and come back to the Naturally Conscious community and let us know all about what you're learning and exploring. It's a very difficult concept for me to put into words, and there are times, these are those times when some of the friends that I've had, really friends and colleagues that I've had really great conversations about this, it's like I need to invite them, and I will be inviting them more often, because I do think that these are more philosophical conversations that we can have. It's almost like, for example, my name Tigria, as you know, is a small South American feline, Leopardus tigrinus. And Leopardus tigrinus just recently was declared. So they just discovered that there's another species of me. So I have two Leopardus tigrinus, and then, unfortunately, I can't remember the name, and I'll look it up and I'll post it for you. But basically, Leopardus tigrinus is now seen as one that inhabits mostly certain areas and has a series of characteristics. And then there's these slight differences for another species that is still a tigrillo. So it's still a tigrillo that has, though, slightly different characteristics, and that gives kind of a more northern versus a southern. And I thought this was beautiful. That being said, there's also the margai and the ocelot, which are very close species cousins. So we're all kind of cousins, one within another, and that gives us the opportunity to express these slight differences. And, which is the part I love, it allows us to express our connection to place. And our connection to place, our connection to our environment, our space, the fact that we are a part of the environment is a big part of what we've been missing as human beings. It's our disconnection to nature, which therefore is our disconnection to our own true nature, our own plantness and rockness and all these different aspects. So it's as if for Leopardus tigrinus divinus to develop this kind of divine level connection, you need to have all these other species that allow the full expression of this genus, whether we're talking about an animal in that case, or Rosa Hulthemia, like whatever we're talking about, for them, for these to reach their divine levels, we need this full expression. And so what happened to the various sapiens, like to the various Homo species below them? And lately I've been watching a lot of, there's a show, I watch it on YouTube. I'm sure it was on television at some point, or is on television, called Born Differently. And I was watching this is several years ago, probably about 5 or 6 years ago when I first started to watch the show. I was watching with, sitting with spider plants and several other plants, and I was watching, and I kept getting this sort of nudge as we were now Born Differently is a show that shows people that we would today label as handicapped. Just put that in air quotes. Handicap is the way that that originally watching the show, you would think of these people. But the thing about this is that it shows that these people have these beautiful, rich, amazing lives and capabilities that have only been able to emerge thanks to the fact that they have this other situation that today we call a handicap. So I kept thinking about different plants that I have seen have to adapt to certain conditions and to grow in certain areas, and how that has developed into the species that we revere today. So today we see many different types of species of plants that we think of as amazing, beautiful, we covet, we study, we have all these different aspects and connections to. But if you go back to the origin, to the first emergence of that species, it came through usually a situation of drought or some kind of extreme condition that then pushed the plants to develop different aspects of themselves or to prioritize certain things and diminish certain things. Now, in a plant, when we see this in a plant, we think amazing. Like, look how this plant has adapted. Look at all of these new characteristics. We think of this we use a lot of terminology and a lot of words that are in the positive realm. But when the exact same thing happens to a human, so in embryo, maybe there wasn't enough oxygen, or there's not enough space, or there's not enough things, and the person is born, we label it a handicap. Not diversely abled, which is the term that I currently use today, not an adaptation, in a survival instinct, an ability to morph into a different form of human that could, according to Darwin's own definition of evolution, eventually continue to morph with subsequent. Sometimes when you use biological terms and you're talking about humans, it sounds a little insensitive or it sounds rude, but hopefully you'll understand why I'm saying it. As that species continues to breed or, regenerate or have children, that particular characteristic enters into the sapien, and eventually could be that sapien turns into something else. So rather than having one form of Homo, we might eventually arrive to have a second one. And isn't that amazing? Like, what capabilities could we potentially have that we, because we're so afraid of not knowing, of not wanting to be outside of the norm, we kept thinking that we're going to hold this back. We're going to medicate you. We're going to give you therapy. We're going to isolate you. We're going to make this seem as if it's a one-off. We don't revere any of these differences and look at, and I'm not saying we should trigger them on purpose, because that doesn't work either. That's not the way the natural world, sure, there are some horticulturists that are trying to do that, and botanists and molecular biologists that are doing that. But that's not really what we're talking about. Let's go from the natural approach using Darwin's kind of definitions and such. Isn't it possible that many of the things that today we're labeling with all these negative labels are really a whole series of characteristics that are expanding? Autism, Down syndrome. Who says that these are handicaps? What if they're diversely abled? That should we allow this to be exalted? Should we see the amazing skills and gifts and talents and capabilities, physical as well as mental and emotional and spiritual, that these individuals have? Wouldn't that be amazing and enriching to the overall sapien landscape, with the possibility of us having more expressions of the enormous amount of capabilities within us, from a chromosome level, from a DNA level, from so many different aspects? Yes, will there be hardship? course, like sometimes there is hardship in that, but there's hardship in life at all levels. Like each one of us experiences different types of hardship, no matter what our capabilities are. It's just that sometimes our capabilities are within a container that looks quote unquote normal. And therefore we treat as, us as if like, these are the people that we should be like. And then we look at others and we say, oh, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Who says that it's so sorry? Like, have you watched something like Born Differently? If you sit down with somebody who has some of these different situations, and we were to take away the cultural norms that do not allow us to enjoy it or to create um, landscapes and new environments for these people to fully express themselves. I mean, how much of the problem is the person's individual state versus how much of it is that our society is not flexible enough to embrace and create and work with this. And so much of this is that fear. We have this fear that this is wrong, more work, it's sad, it has all these types of characteristics, that therefore we hold our society to a whole series of barriers and boundaries that then puts these people inside and then says to them, see, they're suffering. And it's like, no, society is creating a whole series of different aspects. Now, I understand that this is a somewhat limited discussion in the way that I'm presenting it. And I do not, I qualify this right now, do not pretend to have all the answers. I have been blessed in my life with so many different types of people, like between my travels, between the fact that I think I just am a person who looks for those experiences and who recognizes even my own, neurodivergence when I was younger, and neurodivergence that I have. I recognized it when I was much younger, but I didn't label it as such. I was able to work through it in a different, completely way. So I see the expansiveness of it, not just for myself, but for the people around me. I've had, friends and family members and with all kinds of different aspects. And rather than looking at it as, something is wrong, it's more of, wow, what are the abilities that come with this? What are the capabilities that you have? How are you interacting with society? And where is society also failing you? Because society is built. I'm going to give you a really silly example because you know me, sometimes I give super banal examples to understand this. I have a very good friend who is extremely, extremely tall, very tall, like, can't even speak. Like, 6'7", 2 meters 5, like a really tall person who's been in my life for a long time. And I remember having conversations with him about how difficult the world was to navigate for him because he was so tall. People oftentimes talk down to one another, like physically. And so he would have to like lean in closer because people don't think to speak facing upwards. Houses are built. I remember his dream was to have a house that was built at his size so that he could do things. Now, we don't look at somebody who is that tall, who is not ridiculously tall, but he is very tall for modern society. We don't look at this as a handicap. We think of this as a whole series of other capabilities that he has thanks to his height. And trust me, there are. It's super interesting. He once carried me around to let me see the world from his height, and it's just a whole different experience. Anyways, there's all these capabilities that he has, but we look at tallness, especially in that level of tallness, as something that is beautiful, as an expression, as in abilities. Go in the other direction, and once you start getting into people who are shorter, there comes a point where you're short and there comes a point where you're handicapped. We have very different labels. And so therefore, these people, where if you were looking at the skulls of these people, and if you were going at this from a paleontologist perspective, I'm not saying looking at the skulls now, I'm saying as a paleontologist perspective, years in the future, we might even think of these people as different species because they have a whole series of different characteristics from us. But we're not allowing them to fully evolve into their complete selves. just like where we would leave in plants, right? We have several plants that are like dwarf species and large species. We have all these different aspects, and we allow that full expression, and we don't label one good, one bad. A dwarf rose is not bad compared to a normal rose. A dwarf poodle, from a dog perspective, is not any worse than a regular size poodle, right? Even our own terminology, regular size, larger, smaller, we use things like regular, normal, and all these aspects, and we continuously hold back our evolution. And I think we do this. This is a big example, which oftentimes helps me to see where to look, and then I start going from there into, because that's more of a societal norm, and then I start taking from there steps backwards to look from society to the individual, both the individual that is experiencing this kind of bias and is being held back from their full expression because of this, such as autism or hyperactivity or any kind of neurodivergence, for example, or even somebody who is born with 6 toes or 6 fingers. We look at this as something negative, where maybe over generations, those 6 toes will turn out to be extremely useful for a new landscape that is developing in our world. We keep trying to pigeonhole people back into what we think today is normal. 10 fingers, 10 toes, 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth, all of these different things, and then moving on beyond that, from the way that the person acts to the way they think to the way. I invite you, even if just from an academic experiment, to maybe you could do this in a meditation, you could do this through a journaling exercise. I invite you to connect with a plant partner, have a plant friend, whether it's an ancient tree or a plant that has been living in your household for a long period of time, somebody you feel that you could really connect with if you're not used to doing this. And I invite you to take a little time to ask about species differentiation, to open yourself with this plant partner in a safe environment. You can come into the Naturally Conscious community and do it with us, to really invite you to ask your plant partner to show you, what does species differentiation mean within the plant world. Just explore that. I pretty much guarantee you that what will come if you truly open yourself and you remove sort of your human labels for a second, you remove your aspects of this is good and this is bad and this is healthy and this is unhealthy and this is suffering and this is living a good life. And if you just remove all of that, give yourself a little space where you put all of that outside of it, however that feels good to do. And your plant partner can definitely help you, because those kinds of terminologies don't really exist in the kin home. And ask your plant partner to sort of bring you into a journey where you get to see how species developed and what does the species development and differentiation mean to that specific genus. So you could pick one specific genus. It could be specifically the plant you're working with, or it could be something much more broad. But I invite you to just try this. See where it takes you. Experiment with it. Give yourself the opportunity to have different definitions. And then from there, ask yourself, give yourself some extra space and recall in yourself, as well as maybe other people around you, other humans, let me differentiate, because you're working with a plant person, now with a human person. What changes in the way that you see this person's life thanks to this new vision that comes to you from plants? So allow your plant partner to show you what species differentiation is, and then give yourself some space to let that integrate into yourself and integrate into your relationships and definitions of humans around you, and ask, what changes? What does this allow me to do and to be, especially for myself? Where is there a fear that is holding me back from the full expression of some part of myself? Because current society sees that full expression as something wrong. it has a label for it. Where am I not able to really lean into my neurodivergence, which might give me a greater appreciation or experience with music or colors or with a different way of expression? Where am I holding myself back because my species differentiation that is coming out is not normally accepted in mainstream society, and therefore is holding me back from my full expression? I'd love to hear what comes up from you from this. I'd love to hear what you think about this whole. Am I just off? Am I just thinking way too far in a different direction? I welcome your feedback. You can leave me a comment. You can reach out to me directly. You can come into the Naturally Conscious community and tell me. I really want to have this discussion because I am getting super frustrated, and especially when I work one-on-one with people and I see how much they hold themselves back. When I work with a human that is completely holding back their expression for so many of these different aspects, and I ask, if we change the overall kind of way we look at this at a high level, how much more freedom will we as individuals feel at the individual level? So that's my request to you. I would say challenge, but it's really more of a request. And so I look forward to your feedback. I really want to continue these types of conversations. Your feedback is what makes not just this podcast possible, but it really helps every single person that continuously, is entering into these realms to express themselves better. So please reach out and let me know. I absolutely love your feedback. Even if you're against what I say, or if you see it in a completely different way, actually, that's the diversity. I love it all. I love all of the different ideas because you are a unique being with your own unique experiences. And it is through that expression that we reach the richness of diversity that we're all looking for. So that's me, Tigria Gardenia, for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Remember, resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance, no matter how strange or weird it is. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. Intro and outro music by Steve Shuley and Poinsettia from The Singing Life of Plants. So join me, Tigrila Gardenia, and my plant collaborators next time on ReConnect with Plant Wisdom.